Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining. Thank you so much for making time to join us today for Evolve number 2. This is part of our series of panel discussions in a fireside chat format. Today is aimed around the topic of containers and particularly containers on the VMware Tanzu platform. It's great to have you here today. We really appreciate you making time to join us. If you're watching on a replay, thank you for joining us in virtual sense after the event. My name is Dez Blanchfield. I have the pleasure of being your host and moderator for today. And I'm joined by 3 experts that I will introduce in a moment in this whole market industry space. I'm going to just briefly outline how we're going to cover this hour. It is a solid hour. We will start on the hour and finish on the hour. I'm going to start out with a brief meet the team. That will be followed by a market update, an industry briefing by Harris Schneiderman from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Then we will jump straight into our panel discussion, the main stage for today, and run through 3 key topics that seem to be in boardroom level on a constant basis now. The business challenges and opportunities related to containers and what they can bring as a platform and capability to an organization in general. We'll be then talking about some of the technology fit and some of the ways that the VMware Tanzu platform can address the technology challenges that you're going to face. And then we're going to talk about the whole journey from trials, testing through to operational and how to go live and some of the key steps involved in that. So, and then we will wrap up with a Q&A at the end. We want you to jump in with your questions through the whole hour. So by all means, particularly in the panel discussion, please do put your questions forward in the Q&A feature of the platform, and we'll integrate those into the conversation as much as we can. And those that we can't integrate into the conversation through the panel discussion, we'll definitely touch on in the Q&A section. So let me very, very briefly introduce our amazing panel today experts. I am joined by Harris Schneiderman, who's joining us from Melbourne today. Harris is the Enterprise Sales Director for the Hybrid Cloud practice at HP SouthPac. Harris, great to see you. Thanks for making time to join us today.
Thanks a lot, Des. Great to see you again.
We're also joined by Murali, who's joining us from Singapore. Murali is the Director of Technology for Containers and Devsecops at HP Pointnext at APAC. Murali, great to see you. Really great to have you on the show. Thanks for making time.
Great to see you, Des.
We're also joined today by David Curry, who's joining us from Sydney, just as I am. David is the Head of Solution Engineering for VMware Tanzu. David, really appreciate you being here. Thanks for making time to join us.
Great to see you, Des.
Now, I'm going to hand over the microphone in a moment to Harris Schneider, who's going to give us a brief market update. He's going to take us through a 5 or 6 minute journey through some of the latest market trends, what HP in general is seeing across the market currently with the broad topic of containers, and essentially to set the scene for today's panel discussion. So Harris, without any further ado, I wonder if I could hand over to you now to just give us your brief market update, what you're seeing in the industry, some of the latest news and updates and trends that we should be considering as we then move into our panel conversation.
Absolutely, Des. And again, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me today. So, these are some of my observations about where we are in the container market. So I think the first trend, and I think a lot of people on this webinar are probably sensing this, the market is growing very rapidly. According to many analysts, the expected growth year on year in the container market is 29% each year until the year 2026. So that's phenomenal growth. And it's a key trend that that customers need to be aware of. The second trend is there seems to be a convergence around a single standard around container management and container orchestration, which is, of course, Kubernetes. Kubernetes adoption has increased from 27% to 48% in the past year alone during the period of COVID. So clearly, Kubernetes is gaining market traction. And the other trend that we're seeing is that hybrid cloud strategies and implementations seem to be emerging as the most common ways that containers are used today. Now, certainly we're going to talk about others. I'm not, don't want to leave the impression that that's the only way, but that's certainly emerging as a very popular use case. So we see this trend around convergence around a standard and around certain use cases. But by the same token, we see that the application container market is still very, very competitive. There are, a plethora of small and large players operating both domestically and internationally, across the world. And, that means that, it's creating fragmentation, across different vendors. So on the one hand, we have this kind of standard, but on the other hand, we've got a lot of different vendors that are getting involved. So that's just a quick summary of where I see things. Curious for your observations, Dez, around, how are containers being used in enterprise environments, and any patterns that you've seen around successful or unsuccessful projects.
Indeed, thank you. No, there's some amazing stats, and I was blown away by the 29, let's call it 30% expected growth. So there are two things very briefly. At boardrooms level, what I'm seeing within boardrooms is that organizations are still finding it difficult, as they did with digital transformation and cloud technology. They're finding it challenging to find the right vocabulary and the right language with which to discuss this topic. They're also realizing that they may not have the right skills in-house. It's not their core business. If a bank is a bank, they need to be the best bank they can be. They don't necessarily need to be experts in containers. And so they're looking for the right partner of choice. The second part of that is I'm seeing this whole journey as I did with the emergence of, say, cloud computing, where in the very early days, a lot of people weren't necessarily prepared for it, and then it just happened to them and they were in catch-up mode. What I'm seeing now is organizations realizing that happened to them, and they are more and more actively seeking out the right organizations, such as yourselves at HPE and Pointnext and VMware, to take them on this journey as early as possible so they don't get caught out again as they did with cloud technology.
Excellent. And some other observations I've seen, Dez, I think it's worth pivoting to security and thinking about security of containers. If we survey customers around what are their major considerations around container adoption, security is the #1 concern for obvious reasons, because many times they're deploying critical applications which store really important data in those containers, and so securing that environment is really important. Another trend we're seeing is that now 75% of organizations have some type of DevSecOps program in place. I know we're going to talk more about that today, but it's great to see a recognition and a realization of the importance of that. And not to say that the term DevOps is going away, but we're seeing a shift towards DevSecOps because organizations are recognizing the importance of putting security front and center and having that be a core part of the offering, not something that you bolt on at the end. Another development in the world of standards, if you're familiar with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, they're part of the US Department of Commerce. They published a document called the NIST Special Publication 800-190 Application Container Security Guide. And this is a set of guidelines that serve as a useful starting point and a baseline if an organization is going to do a security audit or if they're going to be audited by a third party. And what's really great about that guide is that it breaks down the security concerns that organizations have, as well as the mitigation strategies that they can use for each layer of the container stack. So it's great that we have that level of guidance. And the other thing that NIST recommends, which really resonates with me, is that organizations need to transform their operational culture as well as their technical processes, because ultimately containers enable a new way of developing, running, and supporting applications that are made possible. But you can't just take a purely technical approach. So it's great to see NIST recognize that.
Fantastic. Well, Harris, that's an amazing summary of kind of where we're at currently, and some great observations there. I think there's a lot of homework for people to be taking away from this to look at it. Certainly, I have to admit, I have had read that in passing, the NIST update, but I need to go back and refresh myself even at this context. So let me bring back our amazing panel here and reintroduce each of them. And I'm going to get each of you, if you don't mind, just give me a 1 or 2 minute summary of kind of what your roles and remits are within your respective organizations. So Harris, while we've got you still, Harris Schneiderman, you're the Enterprise Sales Director for the Hybrid Cloud practice at HPE SouthPac. I wonder if you could just take a couple of minutes to just introduce yourself and your role and your remit in general.
Sure. Well, I work in the services portion of HPE. So we help customers design, implement, migrate, and support workloads in a hybrid cloud environment. And that could mean public cloud, it could mean private cloud, it could be a combination of the two. The key thing for us, Dez, is that cloud is not a place that you put things. It's a way of operating. It's a new way of delivering IT. And our strategy is to help customers, embrace and enable that in any environment, whether that be on-prem cloud or somewhere in between. And a key component of being able to help customers with hybrid cloud transformation is adoption of containers. So containers are a key pillar or an essential tool in that transformation journey.
Fantastic. Murali, I wonder if I could come to you next. You're the Director of Technology for Containers and DevSecOps. Interesting broad remit there at HPE Pointnext for APAC. I wonder if you could, again, take a couple of minutes just to introduce yourself and give us a little outline of your role and the remit that you cover.
Sure. Thanks, Des. So I drive the adoption of container and Devsecops technology for HP customers across APAC, right? So in this role, we kind of help the customers to start adopting the container technology in a small scale, where where they can start running some workloads, right? So it is transforming the IT team to offer a solution which is cloud-like experience for their own IT people. I mean, it could be for internal people, or it could be their customers, how to kickstart their journey and how the IT team can transform to start offering this journey, right? Now, as part of this journey, there are certain kind of people who are looking for people who are looking to understand the container and start small. So for them, we offer a pilot service, like a try and buy service, where they can start with a couple of nodes and buy that. And there are some mature organizations who are already having containers. Now, for them, how we can improve the productivity by using Devsecops tool to automate the process of taking the code from development to the production in a span of very less time. I mean, we are kind of doing transformation where we are measuring that they are currently maybe taking months, and how we can improve that to bring it down to maybe days or even hours. So helping our organizations, our customers, our partners to go through this transformation journey.
Fantastic. Well, we're certainly going to delve into that pool of knowledge and expertise and experience you have right there. David Curry, you're the head of solution engineering at VMware Tanzu. I wonder if you could also give us just a couple of minutes of an outline of yourself and your role and what its remit is in general.
Yeah, thanks, Des. So I look after solution engineering, as stated. Basically, I work in the division of VMware, which is around the modern application platforms area of the business. So most people traditionally think of VMware as a virtualization company, but over the course of the last 24 months, 2 years, 24 months, the organization's been acquiring a number of organizations in the modern applications space. So I help customers with the products that we bring to market and enable them to modernize a lot of their applications, taking existing applications, but also potentially building new applications. And not just looking at it from the Kubernetes perspective or the container perspective, but the surrounding ecosystem and the tools and technologies that are required for that. So we're working with customers to enable them on those technologies, help them implement like ongoing sort of operational processes that enable them to continue to evolve those platforms and the surrounding ecosystem. And so that's really the remit. It's across ANZ, but I also have a remit in APJ as well.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, thank you all for giving us a brief outline of your roles, your remit, and just a bit of an introduction to yourselves. So let's dive straight into the whole point of today's catch-up, the panel discussion itself, the main stage event. So folks, we're going to touch on 3 key points. We're going to look at the business challenge and opportunities. We're going to talk about the technology fit and where the VMware Tanzu platform plays into that. We're also going to look at how to shift from testing and trials and deployments through to operational. So let's just start with the overall business challenge and some of the opportunities that arise from that. 2 key things that come up quite regularly when we talk about containers as a design pattern, as a cultural shift to adoption of technology, is how and where to apply them. That's often the first thing that comes up. And then the second thing is fairly naturally, I'm sure, which is where the business value can be gained from these. Harris, I wonder if I can come back to you and you can kick us off, please. In your role as Enterprise Sales Director for the Hybrid Cloud practice at HP SouthPac, you must be talking about the business benefits around containerized solutions constantly, I'm sure. How are containers helping organizations deliver value faster?
Yeah, it's a great question, Des. So, there's a number of use cases. I think just to start with one, and I think the obvious one that a lot of customers think about, containers are designed to help an organization speed up the time to market for their applications, okay? Now, this is obviously beneficial to organizations whose primary business is to develop and sell software. So certainly there are benefits there. But, as we've seen over the last number of years, every company in some ways is becoming a software company. Even if their core product isn't software, software is a key enabler for their business. And so making it easier for an organization to get their software developed and released faster is a critical differentiator for their success. Right? And so, the benefit here is that the applications are developed in a container, they're packaged in a container, they're tested in a container, and they're deployed into production in a container. So containers become a pervasive tool and set of capabilities across that application lifecycle. Containers also provide benefits for, making it easier to troubleshoot problems in release issues and help restart and recover from failures, which are inherent in any production environment. So containers are an essential tool. But the key thing is, like all technology, they're only as good as an organization's ability to adopt them. And so you have to, in order to succeed with containers, you have to change the way you develop software, the way your processes work, your development, your testing, your release cycles to take advantage of that agility. Containers are not a panacea. They're not a magic fix. And so containers are part of a broader conversation around app modernization and app transformation.
I like that. Yes, I think it's a very key point there that containers are not some sort of magical unicorn with a butterfly wings and rainbow color. They're just an evolutionary step in the way that we deploy and implement technology in the same way that cloud computing was, and I guess digital transformation as a whole ecosystem around it. David, I wonder if I could bring you in here. I mean, you literally live and breathe containerized solutions in your role as head of solution engineering at VMware Tanzu. Where are you seeing the greatest gains for organizations looking to leverage containers, and particularly on your VMware Tanzu platform?
I love the fact that Harris finished with the whole, it's not the panacea, it's a greater, so it's part of a broader conversation around app modernization, because that's exactly the way to position it. But if I talk about the benefits that organizations that I've worked with and that we've worked with, especially with VMware Tanzu, it's around velocity. And I think Harris touched on this, the speed at which organizations are able to deploy applications into production. And that's the key, getting it into production. I mean, I've got examples where organizations have moved from months into days, and sometimes even more frequently than days, in terms of being able to release not just new applications, but also existing, heritage or legacy applications as well. Consistency of environments. I think, Harris, you touched on this one as well. Like, it's being able to move from a staging environment, non-prod, prod, dev environments, and just have consistency, and the ability for people to manage those environments in a consistent way is really, really important and helps. The flexibility with these solutions in terms of like being able to deploy into, on-prem, in the cloud, combination of both, anywhere in between, whatever it is also really super important for organizations. Having that ability to have a flexible sort of deployment model. Security, and I think we sort of heard earlier about the embedded idea of bringing security as far left into the process, or as early in the process as possible, is a super important thing in terms of, risk, audit, governance, compliance, all of that type of, in terms of that. And then efficiency, having teams that look after these sorts of platforms not have to spend so much time looking after them, because there's technology out there that makes it easy, like VMware Tanzu, which enables those teams to actually look at value add and the evolution of the platform, thinking about what is it that I need to provide to the teams that are consuming these things to make their lives even easier, so that they can speed up. We're more efficient. Operationally, it's super simple. These are the kinds of benefits I see a lot of organizations that have done this really well, they get through.
Fantastic. And I know we're going to get into a bit more detail around this, but one of the things that really jumps out at me there is that what we've been able to see take effect now with containerized solutions and the entire design practice and design patterns around this is more of an end-to-end seamless integration, from working on a laptop or a desktop to write code, or a cloud virtual machine developing wise, then see that go through testing and then build and trials and training and then into production, and then go at scale and scale up and down. It's essentially the same ecosystem, same environment, and it just depending on the environment, whether I'm developing or testing or training or in a DR solution or production, it's essentially the same space. It works on all different platforms, and I think this is one of the things that organizations are going to very quickly see the business benefits for. Murali, I'd like to bring you in now, if I can, in your role as the Director of Technology for Containers and DevSecOps at HPE Pointnext. You and your team must be doing a lot of work around enterprise strategy around containers. What are the biggest opportunities to deliver business benefits for containers in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, see, what we are seeing is the businesses are kind of stressed in this current duration, right? So they, as Harris and David clearly mentioned, they want agility. The businesses want to be agile so they can deliver the product faster. But at the same time, they also want to keep the cost lower, right? They want to kind of make the cost for operating lower, and they also want to have the system to be more stable and more secure, maintaining this particular flexibility, right? Now, this is a kind of very good spot for containers where they can bring the agility and give the value for the business while bringing the cost for operations and kind of managing this process very less, right? So this is one significant advantage which has happened, right? And also, if you see the core technology of the containers, it's basically how our semiconductor industry has evolved, and you have large compute capacity in single servers, right? So rather than going with the virtualization, by going into containers and specifically running microservices on containers, you are leveraging your infrastructure much more efficiently than having the kind of heavyweight which is running from the virtual machine. So this is kind of making, instead of running one maybe 10, 20 VMs on a specific server of a similar capacity, you can maybe run hundreds of microservices. So that is a kind of capacity boost which is bringing into the technologies, right? Now, the container technology also has evolved technically very, in the last, especially couple of 2-3 years, it has evolved significantly. Specifically, some of the technologies with container storage interface. Previously, if you go back, people used to run, okay, container is only for microservices, stateless workloads. Now, you're seeing production grade adoption of containers running mission critical databases and even databases running banking system running on containers. Of course, it is not a wide adoption, but you are kind of seeing. So with this area also covered, you will potentially be able to run almost all the workloads in future. Of course, there are certain workloads which are still better to be run on the other kind of infrastructure, but it is much more efficient now, right? And as a matter of fact, if you see, many of the cards product, many of the banking industries, many of these products, they are rewriting their complete applications to run on containers, right? So an enterprise henceforth is going to have a container platform which can pretty much run any workload. So it becomes essential part of any enterprise to offer this as a service for their enterprises. So because of this, we are kind of trying to help organizations to build it, start it in an efficient way, bring in a DevOps kind of culture so that they can utilize this much better and start ready for the future.
Indeed, and you raised a really interesting point there just at the end that I wanted to just highlight, and that is that, traditionally when we thought about containers, we often thought about it with our legacy code, and we ended up focusing on refactoring code to make it work in containers. But invariably, as you said now, the COTS or common off-the-shelf solutions are actually already built and cloud native, container native, and therefore it's not just a nicety, it's a necessity, because the code's going to come to us expecting an environment to run containerized applications and systems all the way through the business. And I think this is a really critical point that you raised there. And that brings me into our second topic now that I'd like to jump into, which is the whole area around the technology and the solution fit. And obviously today we were looking at the VMware Tanzu solution that HPE and VMware bring to the table. One of the things that I'm seeing here is this challenge of, how and where to incorporate the container solutions in the first place in a business environment, and then which platform is the right fit. And I think one of the things that keeps coming up is that if you have already got a vested interest in a long-term platform, and particularly VMware as a solution that you've been through, maybe from hardware to virtualization, and then you've done, physical to virtual or P2V transitions, and then you've moved from on-premise to a third-party data center hosted environment with whatever solution you might have had still in VMware, and then you've moved into VMware in the cloud solutions. Containers seem to be such a natural fit because you've already got an investment in the space that you've had, HP and VMware bringing to the table. Now VMware Tanzu just integrates end-to-end. David, with that in mind, I wonder if you could walk us through essentially a 30,000-foot view of the VMware Tanzu solution from end-to-end. And in particular, where organizations should be looking to VMware Tanzu as the right technology and solution fit for their containerized business logic and applications in general.
Yeah, so when I talk about VMware Tanzu, I like to expand this just beyond the actual container orchestration element, right? That's one part of like a much broader, a supply chain, let's call it that. So if we think about the software development lifecycle or the application lifecycle management, that whole process, thinking about like a developer or an application team delivering something to an end user, That's what Tanzu is trying to address. And so we're thinking about security, we're thinking about how to make it efficient for those teams to deliver this. Certainly the orchestration part is also very important. And then obviously getting it in the hands of that end user, the people that need to be able to sort of interact with whatever that application is, whether it's internal users or external users. So in this sort of like, with this context, if we think about like developers or product teams or application teams, they're typically, you know, sort of looking at different sort of technologies, whether they're a COTS product or they're building themselves and they're using frameworks, you know, frameworks that might be, you know, Java frameworks or .NET frameworks. And VMware has actually got some, not skin, I should say, some products there to help those organizations, frameworks around Spring, as an example, which is one of the most popular web Java frameworks, or .NET Steel Toe, which is also, you know, bringing the goodness of Netflix, you know, in terms of how they've developed microservices, bringing that and to development teams and application teams. So curators of Spring, curators of like Steel Toe, and so the number of Spring and sort of Steel Toe projects that we've got is quite a numerous. It's quite a large number, and that helps those teams really get up to speed very quickly. And then typically when those developers are sort of building or providing their code, they're using Git as a source repository and some CI that's actually, or continuous integration to then deliver that and sort of containerize or create an artifact, an image, right? But one of the things that they're looking for is app dependencies. And what we bring to the table there is a thing called build service, Tanzu build service. And that allows you to create standard image with app dependencies, like the Java framework or the Node, Ruby, .NET, other frameworks, whatever it is, app dependencies. And those standard images can be used by those application teams along with their application code. They don't need to worry about creating them themselves. They pick them up. And the benefit there is you have standard, curated, governed, security approved images ready to go that aren't bringing in vulnerabilities that are available to those app teams to be able to be used. And then they can also bring in things that they might consume, like a data service or a messaging service. And Tanzu application catalog, which provides curated, standard images that are stored and available for those teams to use, can also be provided. And therefore, together, the build service or standard images and curated images of data services or whatever it is that they need can be put together and then stored in, guess what, a registry. And we use an open source registry, Harbor, to help with that. And then once you've got all of that together and it's all sort of governed and there's a lot of security around that, then effectively we've got a method for allowing them to, through CD, because most development teams are actually then continuously deploying or delivering, a place to deploy them in. And Tanzu Kubernetes Grid is that place. And that could be on vSphere, it can be in any cloud, it could be on a combination of both. It really doesn't matter. It's basically providing that seamless way for them to deploy that into that environment. And then what's really important here is now you've deployed it, you need to be able to sort of, hang on, someone needs to manage this environment. How do you manage these environments? They're across different clouds. They're in different locations. How do you do that simply? How do you manage the health and status of those environments or those, you know, those areas? How do you apply policy? How do you govern them if you need to? How do you control access and rights and privileges? Well, Tanzu Mission Control is that method. And that Tanzu Mission Control is really, really good in terms of attaching to existing Kubernetes deployments, whether they're VMware Tanzu deployed Kubernetes clusters or others. They could be a public cloud version. They could be a, God forbid, a competitive solution, but they could be those as well. And then you've got then you've got some really important things in terms of how do you observe what is happening with this application that you've just deployed and is running in Kubernetes, but not just the application. I want to look at what's happening at the container orchestration level. And you know what? I also want to look at what's happening at the infrastructure level. So Tanzu Observability is capable of ingesting massive amounts of data across, you know, wherever it's coming from, whether it's infrastructure, application, and anywhere in between, and providing that back in a visually appealing way to executives or engineers for them to be able to troubleshoot where they may need to make some changes in terms of configuration or add some sort of resource capacity, whatever it is, right? And observability does that. And then, you know, now you've deployed these applications, you might have like different services, microservices, as Murali talked about. You may need to connect these services. Well, we also provide Tanzu Service Mesh, which allows us to actually create connections between different services to serve them up to the end user, and they'll get an amazing experience. And that allows us to control and route traffic and have that across multiple clusters and clouds, and depending on where it is. So the idea is the end-to-end solution, not just the container orchestration. Tanzu's portfolio and product range covers that whole end-to-end solution.
That's fantastic. And David, just while I've got you, a couple of questions have come from the audience, which I'm going to paraphrase, but just to touch on a couple of things there, what really strikes me about what you've outlined there is just the openness. And, I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, as much as one vendor may want the entire market, the reality is that we've got multiple vendors in there, but I do like the fact that your platform is open enough to talk to other either competitive or open source platforms that are invariably going to be out there. We don't always install just one brand. I think that's really important these days, having that openness to integrate to them and manage them. Also like the comment you made about the observability and ability to report. I think the number one thing that organizations are struggling with in this space is just what type of reporting they can get and how much data they can get from that reporting, and how they can map it to a dollar value or some sort of asset, actually, gaining a value from that asset. One of the things I'd like to just throw at you while I've got you though, David, before we move to our next speaker, two things came up. The first question is just, and by the way, folks, David drew this diagram by hand on a whiteboard, which is very impressive. In this diagram, David, one of the questions came up with regard to just how much infrastructure you need to get started from a development environment. I wonder if you can just touch on that for a moment.
Yeah, look, I guess, a lot of our customers would start with a very small amount of infrastructure. It doesn't need a huge number. And one of the things, actually, this is really interesting. One of the things that we do with our customers, we take a very much an application-centric view. So we actually sit down with customers, and actually the team in Australia, New Zealand, has built a tool to actually size the environment that's required, or what you need from a compute perspective, to actually deploy or migrate a set of applications with a few key figures, a few key data points for the applications: CPU, memory, persistent storage, what's required from that perspective, a few key inputs. We can actually tell you what's required in terms of sizing an environment, how many CPU or cores you need, and what that would look like. So it doesn't need a huge footprint, but the view that we've got is definitely look at it from an application-centric view and then work from that perspective.
Perfect. And the second question, sorry to keep you there, but the second question was specifically around where Tanzu fits within the VMware ecosystem. So the long version was, we're already running VMware. Where does Tanzu fit into that? I wonder if you can just give us a brief 1-minute outline of kind of where Tanzu fits into the VMware ecosystem. If I'm already running VMware infrastructure, either on-premise or a third-party data center, or even a public cloud environment for my platform, potentially for VMs initially, where does Tanzu fit into that overall ecosystem?
It's absolutely front and center. That's the short answer. Yep. If you're running vSphere already, I mean, vSphere being a lot of 70–80% of workloads running in the world are running on something that is VMware vSphere. You can actually spin up Kubernetes, our Tanzu product, in vSphere. So vSphere 7 has Kubernetes. It allows you to actually spin it up. You can run it, you can operate it, and it's really, really simple for those people that are very familiar with the vSphere construct and the way that the interface. It's very, very easy for them to spin that up, and that's just running that container orchestration part of it. But it absolutely allows them to spin that up and then start to sort of dabble and work with containerized, container sort of solutions. Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. And folks, for the attendees, thank you so much for keeping the questions coming in. I think the main thing from that for me is that the Tanzu offering is essentially a native within the VMware ecosystem, particularly in vSphere, and a very seamless and painless integration to get up and running. And you don't need a lot of infrastructure to do that. But a great point there, David, about having an application focus, because then you've got a rationale for doing it rather than just tinkering. Murali, I wonder if I can get you now to sort of talk a bit about this whole challenge of, when we think about the topic of the overall technology that containers bring to us and the solution fit, particularly with what VMware Tanzu brings in. I wonder if I can sort of get you to share some of the insights where you're seeing the VMware Tanzu container technology drive successful outcomes as the right quote unquote solution fit across enterprise strategy in your work with your customers.
Yeah, I mean, the single word I would say is the flexibility, especially with the Tanzu container platform, because I feel they have completely adopted the microservices world. So they have broken down all of their services into individual components. As David Curry indicated, they have broken up. Okay, if you want to have just a Tanzu service, you can take Tanzu Basic or the Kubernetes Grid. You want to have something on the applications, you take the Tanzu application service, or taking the Bitnami catalog or the build service. And then if you want to have operations. So you have this kind of a la carte of tools. And when a customer is looking for a specific solution based on their maturity, based on their need, they can pick and choose the right solutions. If they are already having certain other orchestration platforms, even then you can pick and choose specific solutions and you can kind of gel them together. And it kind of creates a very nice ecosystem in this particular layer, right? The other thing is, in terms of the starting point, right? So any customer who is having a even basic vSphere, they can get started with a version of Tanzu, try it out. Even I have a instance running in a lab, which is having a 64 core, and I'm having at least 6-7 workloads, which is running Java, .NET, Python. It's all seamless, right? So of course, in the production for high availability, you need to do certain more things, but that is where you want to kind of get started, right? The other area where I'm kind of seeing traction, especially in the last quarter, is running the artificial intelligence or basically GPU-based workloads on the containers, right? So recently there was an announcement from HPE and NVIDIA plus Tanzu putting together the NVIDIA AI Enterprise. Basically, this is taking your GPU capacity and kind of slicing it and making it available for container workloads. So this is kind of game changing, and this is specifically offered at this point of time on top of Tanzu and HP hardware. So this is something which we are seeing very good traction in the market. So apart from the traditional cloud native applications, the toll factor application, we are seeing a huge fitment in terms of the artificial intelligence workloads, right? And also, especially the people who are using the Spring ecosystem. I mean, Spring, as you know, it was part of the Pivotal Cloud Foundry, Pivotal kind of engagement with these things. The Pivotal, with this Cloud Foundry, there is a lot of knowledge which has been there. Of course, the basic orchestration from Diago is changed to the Kubernetes, but there is a lot of learning in terms of the routers and other things. All those components are now available on top of Tanzu, and they're also advancedly adopting some of the technologies which is required to bring in serverless concept. For example, Graal VM, which is a serverless technology, and making, I mean, this basically the containers are giving flexibility to bring up the workloads faster, right? And the fast, in case of VMs, it could be 5 minutes, and now in the containers, it is 5 milliseconds. So you don't have to run the applications always, and these technologies are also kind of adopting across the barrier. So it is not only on the technology and tools, but also in terms of the workload capabilities, it is giving a la carte of offering. So it makes enterprises to pick and choose what is right for them. And it's giving a lot more flexibility than it used to give in the traditional infrastructure.
Sounds good. I actually just got a DM via Twitter from someone who's tuned as well, and thank you for that. Just Murali, while I've got you, the question I just got DM'd on Twitter was specifically around the percentage of workloads being deployed that are either internally developed versus what's just off the shelf. We spoke about this earlier around the off the shelf solutions. What are you seeing at the moment across the strategic focus you're bringing to customers' projects, where the split between what is an in-house or legacy systems being refactored, recoded, and redeployed versus what's being bought off the shelf and deployed into containers natively? What is that sort of split like?
Yeah, I mean, at this point of time, I would say, especially in terms of Tanzu, we are seeing more applications which are in-house developed, and they are moving into the Tanzu platform, right? Whereas the COTS applications, especially with respect to the Tanzu, they are still in the, I mean, Tanzu is relatively a new product on the market compared to other platforms which has been there maybe for a decade, right? So the COTS product are still adopting. There are COTS products who are basically based on the open source Kubernetes based re-architecture mechanism. So those products we are seeing a lot of adoption, but there are some COTS products where they have taken an opinionated approach and they have made it run only on specific platforms. So that adoption on the Tanzu side is not, it's still picking it up, right? Said that, we are seeing a lot of adoption in the telco space. So the telco, there is a joint, again, HP VMware release from for a specific telco. We have reference architecture. We are seeing the adoption there, but we see more in terms of the modern applications, the in-house applications, especially if you are talking about the Spring ecosystem, we are seeing a lot more adoption with respect to Tanzu.
Fantastic. Harris, I wonder if I could bring you in here next. When we think about the overall technology and solution fit, usually they make and break any business initiative. I wonder if you can sort of speak to how the VMware Tanzu offering is answering that call as the right fit technology for businesses that you work with.
Sure. Well, there's a number of ways I can answer that. I think the first thing to think about are the key use cases. And I alluded to this earlier, and we've spoken about a few of them. So the first one, that we spoke about is that containers are a key tool in your toolkit for enabling application modernization. This is critical because many businesses have invested heavily in applications that were built for an older era of technology. The need for that application still exists, but in many cases, the way it was engineered is no longer ideal. Just to give you a little bit of a stat on that, if we look at where we are today in terms of our adoption of cloud and modern mechanisms, approximately a third of our applications are, built for the modern world. They're cloud native, they're scalable, they run very nicely on the cloud, right? However, the other 2/3 by definition are not. And those are the harder ones. Those are the ones that have data gravity issues and application dependencies, and they were not engineered to be scalable and things like that. So that's where the real opportunity is. And that's where we see customers successfully applying Tanzu to make that a reality, okay? I think the second scenario is around DevSecOps, which we've spoken about, that organizations are changing the way they develop software. And there's a key focus on security, as I mentioned earlier. So Tanzu is a key way to enable that, to enable both greater agility and greater security in terms of the way software is developed and released. And then finally, the buzzword is multi-cloud. Customers are embracing multiple clouds, not just multiple public clouds, but true hybrid environments where they have a combination of public cloud, private cloud, colo, et cetera, et cetera. And so being able to have that flexibility and the portability to utilize the right platform where you need it, containers are a key enabler for that. So those are three really essential use cases where I see containers being implemented.
Fantastic. No, I appreciate it. So let's now think about this journey from the whole, getting started from trials, moving into some early deployments, to then actually getting to full operational status with our strategic shift to containers as a business benefit, as a technology platform and so forth, and an enabler. A couple of things that come to conversations regularly when we talk about this space is just the whole challenge of where to get started with the containers, and more importantly, who can actually help us achieve successful outcomes. Murali, I wonder if I could bring you back in here in this space. I know, from a strategy point of view, you've got a lot of experience in this space with your team and yourself. When we think about that journey from trials, deployment through to full operational status with containers and getting business benefits out of it, how should organizations plan and develop their strategy around their journey from the initial trials and test and development through to that sort of going live and into production state with containers in general and obviously on the VMware Tanzu platform in particular?
Yeah. So typically the approach which we have used is we bring in different personas within the organization. So the first thing is, it is very important to get in the business focal who is who is sponsoring this particular engagement, right? But then he cannot execute. So bring in the additional people, basically the development team or the product owner who is responsible for taking the product, right? Bring in also developers and testers who are managing these applications and the IT operations, right? Along with the security teams. So with these 4 or 5 personas, bring in a pilot application, start with 1 or 2 pilot applications. These are quick, don't try to solve the technology problem, but try to solve the business problem using this. So pick certain low-hanging fruits and start with a pilot, right? Now, The first pilot, you can go in your own way because you don't have to, this is understanding the platform. The next iteration, I mean, it has to be also done in agile way. The next iteration is to see what are the activities you are doing and how you can automate all these things using a Kubernetes or Tanzu native Devsecops platform. So building, deployment, monitoring, everything has to happen inside the Tanzu platform, inside the container platform. How you can start with small components and then have a kind of introspection of what am I doing? What is the toughness? Because when you take microservices, when you are taking these applications deployment onto container platform, it is not easy. Believe me, it is kind of much more effort rather than the regular way. So without automation, there is a lot of questions about the value which it could bring. So you need to start bringing in the tools and technologies, right? The third thing is now, let's say your enterprise is having different set of technologies, different kind of the technology footprint. You have a .NET application, you have a PHP, you have a different application. So bring in the traditional concept of architectural conformity. You say, okay, these are the 4 or 5 technical architectures which we support, and define and automate and make those tools available for these 4 or 5 technologies, right? So when a next developer comes in with this particular newer technology, which is if it is kind of supported, they don't have to spend on the tooling and the process. It is all set there. Of course, if you want to do some changes, it will kind of there. So whatever you have done initially, maybe taken a month or whatever it is, the new application onboarding time, which should be a metric, and it should be reduced drastically, right? A new application which is conceptualized, you don't have to worry about all these things. And if you want to even go live in a matter of a week, if you have the functionality ready, you should go. That is the level of maturity you need to start bringing in, right? Now, your applications alone is not going to suffice. You'll have to also start giving them additional capability. For example, if you want to run TensorFlow, if you want to run some Spark things, or if you want to also have some of these GPU-based workload, start introducing GPU-enabled workloads, and you can start also getting into the analytics portion. So these 4 steps you can kind of start doing, and then start putting a governance around the people who can actually continuously get skilled. And in terms of the technology, it is not only about the container platform, but the continuous ecosystem. Put a governance and put some metrics around how you are doing, especially in terms of your time to market. How much time it is taking? Is it taking weeks? Has it improved? Okay, why it is not improved? Measure that, right? And if you are deploying, whether it is going fine, how many failures are there? Measure that. So take these 4 or 5 basic metrics and start measuring, and put a governance mechanism continuously improve. This is what we have done for a couple of customers, and they are already seeing real value in this way.
Fantastic, congratulations. Yes, it reminds me of that line that you can't manage something you don't measure. I also like the way you very succinctly outlined there that, you know, standard process, well documented, known, repeatable things that can be scaled and continually improve them, continually bring the cost down, and there's a no-brainer business benefit there from a technology and a commercial point of view. David, you must have a lifetime of real-world examples of customers you work with that you've guided through this journey. What's the usual journey from trials and development through to operational production state look like in your world implementing container solutions on your VMware Tanzu platform?
I think Murali covered a lot of the elements there himself, but I do want to call out one thing that he mentioned, which I think is really important, and that is like have an application in mind or applications in mind. I've sort of touched on it earlier. I guess we're talking about something which is an enabling technology. Why is it what is it enabling? It's enabling applications, right? If we don't have applications, then we don't need the technology at the end of the day. So I think it's really important to have that mindset. Think about the application, think about that outcome. Why are we doing this? And that's the real thing. And I think one of the things that we do quite a bit of with customers is like look at the application and try and understand what it is that, and you know, Harris mentioned it earlier as well. I think sometimes the container solution for an application is the right fit, but sometimes it's not. Not everything is going to fit in a container. Don't put a square peg in a round hole, right? It's not going to work, right? So, but one of the things we do quite a bit of is like look at applications very much in the lens of let's work out, are we retaining this application? Are we rehosting it? Are we replatforming it, refactoring, or is it just going to get retired and we're looking at some other solution, whether it's a SaaS delivered, and that to me is the key, is like, and it sort of goes to a lot of what Murali said, and I think Harris has also mentioned, is think about the outcome, think about the application, work from that perspective and move forward. And then obviously the rest of the stuff, standing up platforms, deploying them in different, locations, or, whether it's on-prem, in the cloud, those are decisions that you make based on, what is the right thing for that organization? Like, what is the, there's many sort of topics to cover in that, security, governance, data gravity, like there's a bunch of different things. So, but the key thing is think about the application, and then from that perspective, you can work out the rest. And I would sort of, I'd really sort of work on that basis to start with.
Oh, yes, I think, the main thing for me, taking away key points from that, is that, look where the business benefit is, what systems are you running, and what benefit are they bringing to the system, the company or the business, or what it might be running. You can always tinker all day with things, but if you're not focusing on business benefits and where the systems are applying those benefits and the value of the organization, you can go down a rabbit's hole that never ends. Harris, no pressure, but I wonder if you could bring us home with some key learnings as far as pitfalls to avoid, key areas to focus on when moving from trials and testing into production state as VMware Tanzu-based container solutions move into full operational state.
Absolutely. Well, where I see the biggest mistakes being made, kind of the theme this year that I've seen, is customers that, jump into building an environment or, wanting to deploy something without a really clear plan around what it is that they're going to do and what they want to achieve. And so I always encourage customers to take a step back and say, first of all, it's great that you want to embrace containers. We totally support that. It's a wonderful aspiration. But let's think about, the organization and how we can best achieve that. So, what I advocate, we have an assessment that we do for customers who are at the stage where they're ready to get started that we call a container suitability assessment. Okay. And the idea is that we can look at a customer's environment and give them an actionable plan for success based on an objective, data-driven analysis that's personalized and tailored to their organization. For example, if an organization has really embraced DevOps and that's a native part of their culture, they've done some of the heavy lifting. And so incorporating containers into that is a little bit easier than a customer that's, already, still doing a kind of a legacy kind of, type of application development. Right. The second area that I think a customer should look at, which we can help, is identifying those high value workloads that will provide the biggest benefit for containers. We mentioned this before. Containers are not necessarily for everything. They're a tool, and they can provide benefit in many cases. So really figuring out what those benefits are is key. And then finally, to make sure that you have not just a good technical plan, and not just technical benefits, but a good financial plan and a good business case, because these types of changes, they cost money. They do provide benefits like cost savings and greater agility, but the business case really needs to be clear. So we've got to have that good plan, and we can help identify those good candidates for first movers and a roadmap. Don't just take things tactically and just think about the next step, but rather have a multi-year plan that you can execute against. So that's my advice, and that's where I see a lot of customers tripping themselves up, is not having that big picture before they get started.
Fantastic. Well, Harris, Murali, David, thank you for those amazing insights in each of those key areas around this fantastic discussion. The experience you brought to the table, the knowledge and expertise that you shared. I think there's an enormous number of key and powerful actual takeaways that our audience can now take and put into action and have a play with. Ideally, reach out to start a conversation with each of you respectively, be it HP or VMware Tanzu or jointly, and obviously Pointnext, HP Pointnext, to leverage your expertise and capabilities as they bring business to technology initiatives into their own organizations and look to leverage containers and containerized solutions, be they homegrown solutions or common off-the-shelf solutions that they might be buying more invariably. I think it's a no-brainer that all software is going to be shipped soon or predominantly in a containerized fashion, and expect some place that it can run natively, and organizations that aren't ready for that are going to be in a catch-up mode. We're coming up to the hour. We've got about 6 minutes left. So let's do a little bit of a speed dating run through some of the questions. We've got an enormous number of questions, so I'm going to paraphrase them to be mindful of our time. David, I'm going to come to you first. I'm going to put about 3 questions into one for you here. there are a number of questions that have been put forward for us over the last hour, which I haven't been able to integrate into our overall panel discussion, but I'm going to paraphrase them thus. And they're essentially questions around the challenge of providing orchestration solutions into application teams and where to begin. So if I just quickly paraphrase that, it's like, how do you deal with the whole challenge of working through the requests from parts of different organizations, particularly application teams, and merge them all together to some sort of strategic route through the organization to, where to start, how to get the conversation going, and then the key steps to go through that process of, how do we get our application into containerized solutions and how to deploy it.
Yeah. So okay, this is a good one. This is a great question. My first thing to anyone that gets that sort of request or that has that need to answer the question from an application team, they want to deploy a solution, they need a container solution, work with an organization that has experience doing this. Work with HP, work with VMware, work with an organization that actually knows how to do this stuff and has worked with other organizations and learnt from those experiences and can pass on that learning to yourself, to whoever's doing it, right? So that's really important. I think starting small and making sure you have an application in mind. I keep mentioning application, but that's really super important. And that's a really good thing. So start small, not have the application in mind. Make sure that there's business value associated with that application. One thing that's never going to fly in an organization is if there's no business value, kind of not going to sort of have many legs. It's not going to go too far. So yeah, make sure there's some business value there. Make sure you get the right people involved. Definitely make sure you've got the right level of support from the leaders in the business, the execs in the business, whoever they are. And that's usually, if there's business value from the application perspective, that's really good. From a technology perspective, infrastructure people, security people, super important. Don't forget security people, networking, make sure all of these people are involved as early in the piece as possible. Do just enough for an MVP or minimum viable product. And the word product is important here because what you're delivering, while it's an enabler, it will be a product. It is a product. It's there to be consumed by others. Application teams are your consumers. They are your stakeholders. So make sure you do enough to roll out that MVP. And then because you're keeping in mind that the platform is a product, think about evangelism, evangelize your product, enable others on the product. And this is the three E's. I've called it the three E's. Evangelize your product, enable others so that they're available, they can get onto the platform really quickly, and evolve the product. Continually go out, seek feedback, and understand what the needs are of your consumers, of your stakeholders, and evolve the product.
Fantastic. Okay, now we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to get Murali and Harris to do those also in speed dating format. In 2 minutes or less, Murali, here's a fun challenge for you. There's a couple of questions around the challenge of how to approach automation. Automation is a very large part of the business benefit and the technology benefit. If you were to summarize the best way to approach automation around this space, particularly with the VMware Tanzu containerization solution, what are the couple of things you can advise people to think about there?
Yeah, I mean, we have leveraged the kind of philosophies, frameworks, and principles of Devsecops to automate deployment of workloads to Tanzu, right? Now, what we have done is over a period of time, we have done multiple engagements, and we already have a framework which can be kind of deployed pretty fast to any customers who want to do complete DevSecOps platform. So so if there is any request, you let us reach out to us and we can provide that solution. Now, for people who want to kind of start the philosophy, what we have done is, now in terms of the DevSecOps lifecycle, you take the application, you build the code, then it goes through the testing, it goes through the security testing, it goes through the functional testing, then it goes through the deployment, right? Now, what we have done as a strategic approach is automate the processes, which is not, which doesn't need any manual effort at each of the stage. What does it mean? For example, if you are already having functional test, if you are using some of the functional automation tests, then integrate this as part of the pipeline, right? Otherwise, don't do that in the initial starting point. Do the static code analysis using any of the tools like Fortify or SonarQube. You start with that, right? You also do unit testing. You might be using JUnit, NUnit. If you're already having test cases, you do it. Otherwise, just restrict yourself to the static analysis of the code, right? Even when you're talking about the container build, you have to kind of ensure the security aspects, right? You can do DAS testing, you can write some security testing, but that is again going to take time. So use some of the tools which is already available, which can actually scan the code which is running at the dynamic instance, and also scan the container vulnerability assessment. I mean, basically container packages. So you are using some of the third-party libraries, assess them. So try to do the tools which is straightforward. It doesn't need any involvement or too much effort from the developers, or testers, or security folks. Do that in the first iteration, and then continuously keep on adding as you kind of make the progress. We have a kind of methodology, a 5-level process in terms of the DevSecOps maturity. Based on where you are with respect to the maturity, you keep on adding this and getting to the higher level. So start small, start seeing more value, and then keep on adding more for a period of time.
Fantastic. Harris, lucky last. We've just come up to the hour, but I wonder if you can give us a 1 or 2 minute summary around these questions. I've actually aggregated 5 of them in particular. They relate to the same basic challenge, which is, and I'm going to paraphrase it, that often we see a number of challenges and complaints around this challenge of how do you get essentially management support, funding for projects, getting initiatives up and running. I think essentially this paraphrases to how do you go about developing a business case and then essentially a cost model to put forward and get sponsorship from various parts of the organization to run container initiatives. And I wonder if you could share some of the pros and cons around this process and some of the wins you've been able to successfully help customers with.
Absolutely, Dez. I think this is such a key question because I think a lot of technical folks, read about containers and they understand the technical benefits of containers. And so they just say, well, we should be doing this, right? Let's do something. Let's build something. Let's stand up a cluster. And I certainly understand that impulse. But, businesses, run on business cases. So you've got to have a business case. You've got to have your use cases defined. You can't just take, what I call the field of dreams approach, just build it, build it and they will come. Doesn't work that way. And I think also there's a lot of marketing out there, certainly that says, oh, containers are easy, we can be up and running in minutes and things like that. And, that might be true again from a technical standpoint, but that doesn't mean the organization can adopt it. So, there's a number of things that, we can do to help, obviously. We can help from an economic analysis, what's the ROI and TCO. We can help, look at, assessments of organizations to help them build plans and roadmaps. And we can also do, smaller proof of concepts and proof of values, which are critical to proving something out before an organization is willing to invest further.
Fantastic. Well, I feel like there should be a round of applause for the amazing insights and input you've had. Harris Schneiderman, thank you so much for joining us today from Melbourne and sharing the expertise and knowledge and experience you've had in your role as Enterprise Sales Director there for the hybrid cloud practice at HP SouthPac or ANZ. Murali, thanks for tuning in from Singapore. The insights from your experience as the Director of Technology for Containers and DevSecOps at HP Pointnext APAC has just been invaluable. And David Curry, thank you so much for joining us here in Sydney, along with myself, in your role of Head of Solution Engineering at VMware Tanzu. It's been great to get to know a lot more about the platform, what VMware Tanzu offers, and a mix of the business technology fit and some of the ways to transition operations. And folks, thank you so much for joining us. We are 2 minutes past the hour, so we're going to wrap up now. We really appreciate you joining us on the day. If you're watching a replay, thank you so much, and hopefully you'll share it with your team. A huge thank you to the team from VMware Tanzu for sponsoring this event, and our partner at HP for making this whole series possible. I'm Dez Blanchfield. Harris, Murali, David, thank you so much for your time. And folks, we'll see you again in the next event. And join the conversation online. Follow everyone on LinkedIn. Join the conversation Twitter, and we'll see you in the next event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dez.